Welcome to the Indianapolis Motor Speedway virtual track walk. Peter, how cool is this? We're at Indy.
What a spectacular place.
Yeah.
Ross, you have history there. I've been fortunate enough to run many of the club races there recently, each of the last 3 years, historic races. I don't think anyone can walk or drive under the grandstands off of 16th Street and not get shivers down their spine.
I'm getting shivers sitting here talking about it. So, coming up that front straightaway, turn into turn one, an Indy car flat to the floor. Oh, wait a minute. We're talking about a road course.
We're talking about a different configuration here.
Okay. So we're going to talk about the Indy road course here,
yes,
right?
We are.
And two slight variations. One that's used for a lot of the stuff, IMSA and vintage racing and stuff.
Trans Am.
And the slightly different version that SCCA uses for runoffs and things like that. So we're going to talk about a couple of different versions.
Yeah, and it used to be, of course, that Indianapolis was hallowed ground.
Yeah.
No one could run there. I mean, it was a major hubbub when stock cars were allowed to run there, and then IMSA after that.
Yeah, so, in Formula One, the very first time that I was there at the road course, I was coaching a Formula BMW driver who was competing in a support race for the Formula One U.S. Grand Prix.
Wow.
And, I can remember standing down in turn one watching the F1 cars come down into turn one and turn in. And I learned a lot from watching them. I learned a lot from coaching the Formula BMW driver. I've coached there with IMSA, and I know that you've driven there just recently. So
I have. I was, very fortunate enough to in the first historic race, we had a field of 22 cars that I was running in, and was able to get pole and finish second, and it was spectacular. Driving under Gasoline Alley, that sign. Is amazing. All of the lore, the new garages can't erase the history that permeates that place.
And that's a good and a bad thing. Because I think a lot of drivers, and I've seen a lot of drivers do this, the first time they go to Daytona, for example, and they walk in and they go, wow, and their eyes are the size of a front tire, and, they're just like, they're awestruck by the facility. And I think it's important that when you go there, you respect the history, you appreciate the history, you enjoy the experience, but don't get overly caught up in just this. In the end, it's another racetrack.
Right. Don't deify it. Don't turn it into something more than it is. The basic nuts and bolts that get you around any road course will serve you well here. This is a particularly difficult track to drive because it's been designed to be a little bit difficult.
And obviously that's the purpose of these virtual track walks, is for us to help give you some guidance on how to get around the tracks, a lot of reference points. We're going to talk about some different driving techniques that work in one corner and maybe not so much in another corner. We're going to give you lots of things around the line and where the track has grip, where it doesn't have grip, those kinds of things.
And that's what's really remarkable about this. Let's get to it.
Yeah, so let's jump in. Peter, take her away.
All right. So, obviously, Indianapolis is all about Indy cars.
Yeah.
But James Hinchcliffe, the mayor of Hinchtown, said it best when he said, it's so easy to make a mistake at this place. It's really easy. There are so many very inviting corners to just overdo it a little bit.
And to point out, he's talking about driving the road course at this point.
That is correct.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
And these corners suck you in, and the road is crowned, and the cambers change. It is not particularly, the elevation is not a huge variation, but it's enough to make it a little tricky.
And I think while there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of corners, it's relatively, and we'll get into this, but it's relatively flat, and that makes it a little bit hard to see in some places. When you get a track that's kind of going up a hill and it's right in front of you, it's easy to pick out references. But if the track's just kind of flat or falling away a little bit, it's hard to see where you're going, right?
Well, from the oval, the apron is at a different camber than the front straight or the chute between 1 and 2, which is used for the Indy road course.
Right. So it's a challenging track. Let's put it that way.
So the entry is going to be in the garage area, just above the start-finish line. You're going to be traveling clockwise, looking from above, and that's important to remember. There was quite a capital improvement campaign that was completed in late 2003, early 2014 which reconfigured a lot of the corners. So even if you have driven this before in IMSA and Continental Tire Sports Car Championship and other races at this track, a lot of this is new.
Yeah. And again, because we're looking at this from as many different perspectives as possible, from club racing to pro racing to and
PCA now has a driver's education event, which allows people who would not normally get the possibility of running on this track to do it. So here is some good study material.
Yeah.
The road course configuration for a variety of different organizations that will run there this year and going forward is listed. I think it's really best to break this track up into sections. Do the first third between turn 1 and turn 6 onto the Holman Straight. Then look at the second section, which is the turn 7 to turn 10 section. And then the last section, which is particularly tricky, coming off of the turn 1, turn 2 oval chute, turning right into the turn 13 pit entry, turn 14 sweep back onto the front straight.
Yeah, and because we as drivers can only take in so much, I think you're absolutely right. Break it up, really focus on certain sections, nail one section of the track, really try to refine that, get that perfected as well as you can, and then move on to start working the other stuff.
Well, the cool thing is this is a formula that's worked well for us with other track walks, and it should serve us well with this. The alternate configuration is a turn 5, turn 6, turn 6A. This is in the infield. This is reprofiled again from this section of the track that existed before 2014. And this is going to be very, very important for the folks that are running later this year. Going directly to the elevation mapping, there's clearly not much. One of the things that we do right off the bat with these virtual track walks is basically plot a data lap over top of the Google Earth and see how much the track rises or falls. If you look at it, there's really not much more than about 14 feet of differential here, and in all of my books, that's flat, isn't it?
That's about as flat as you're going to get, yeah. However, there's a couple of really subtle little declines that makes it hard to pick out your reference points, and we'll get to those.
And it's like you say, it's all about visibility. These depressions in the distance can also often play tricks and give you a hard time in picking up landmarks and reference points.
Yeah, and heading down the front straight into turn 1, I think, is the perfect example. It's challenging because it's so wide and vast in some ways, and yet you're in this tunnel, and then you come down there, and it's tempting to get your eyes looking in too early, and yet you have to get your eyes turning in there and looking early, right?
Absolutely, because you're going to be trying to identify these things that are far away. And, the sheer scale of the facility, the sheer scale of it, it is so difficult to see what is in the distance here that you've got to also keep track of where and what is next to you.
Yeah.
In this particular case, approaching the start-finish line, you're really going to want to be relatively close to the wall, not more than 2 car widths from the left side of the car to the wall. And this will give you a better reference point, I think, in terms of driving straight and not crabbing in or having your hands follow your eyes as you search for that elusive turn 1.
And we're going to see this here is it's really tempting to kind of get the car to crab or to make the car crab in because your eyes are trying to move away looking for turn 1.
And turn 1 is so tricky that if you do that, the penalties are much greater. Hitch was absolutely right in the fact that these corners tend to suck you in, and turn 1 is a prime offender.
Right.
Turn 1, a slow right turn falling. When I say falling, it comes off of the slight banking leading onto the front straight into an apron area, and then there's a dip in that area, and then it rises. Most cars can get up just enough of a burst of acceleration, so the turn 2 is more difficult than it appears.
Right, but you need to hustle it between 1 and 2, right?
And I think hustling is the operative word. There's going to be a couple of places we're going to ask you to do that.
Yeah, and by hustle, what we mean is you may think that a little bit of throttle is enough, but there is nothing better than full throttle. So even if you get to full throttle for half a second, that's hustle.
Absolutely. I think that drivers tend to be lazy creatures. They tend to get into a habit. And this is all about asking for more. No matter what venue you're driving this extraordinary track in, it's always about asking more, and you need to ask more between turn 1 and turn 2. Turn 3 is really not a very difficult corner. It's just a flat-out sweep to the right. Most big, heavy cars are going to be drifting or beginning to drift across to the left-hand side in preparation for turn 4, but this is the overview. Looking from above, it is really cool to take a look at this. Now, you can't see at letter B where the small raised apex curbing is, but I can tell you right now, you will tear up some stuff under your car if you hit that thing.
Right. And I think what's great is the way you've designed these slides where the yellow is the areas that is falling away, a little bit less grip. Then you gain some grip where you've got the green shading, correct?
That's right. You need to make absolutely positively sure that you compromise the exit of turn 1 to optimize the entry of turn 2. Most all cars are going to have to breathe, or some heavier cars are going to have to tap the brake to get the nose to finish turning right and start turning left. So I think it's really going to be important that you optimize that entry, and if you have to slow down, there's no point other than to hustle the car between the exit of 1 and entry of 2.
And I think one other thing it just shows here is how important it is to have that car set up as close to the outside wall as you turn into turn 1. Again, not crabbing in from the edge of the track, but keeping the car out there, being disciplined, and having a good, crisp turn into turn 1.
And we're going to be very, very specific on the references that we give in all of these virtual track walks to make sure that you know where that point is. When we talk about a point, we talk about having your shoulder in line laterally with a particular point before you begin the trajectory that moves the car.
Right. This was one of the places where, when I was coaching the Formula BMW driver, we would go and stand down in the grandstands on the outside and watch the Formula One cars come in there. And I think it was one of the first times. Well, it was the first year that the Formula One cars were running at Indy on the road course, and I think a lot of people were shocked at how many drivers made mistakes coming in here. And you think Formula One drivers, they're perfect. They don't ever make mistakes. They deliberately make mistakes to find out what the car can do and what it can't do. The good thing about this is there's a little bit of runoff room if you overbrake.
It is a relatively safe place to do this.
Yeah.
The point is that you can always, and you probably need to have an exit plan.
Yeah.
Especially if you're pushing brake zones into this corner. You can open the wheel, go straight, rejoin the track at a later point. The Speedway is very, very, very safety conscious, and they've done a great job in making sure this works.
Mm-hmm.
So here we are in the car. We are using an open wheel car, I think most apropos for this racetrack.
Yes.
We can see everything. We can see the relationship of the edges of the wheels to the edges of the track. And this reinforces exactly what you just said. Look far down the road.
And this is where it gets tricky in that you've got to have your eyes looking straight ahead to kind of follow the braking zone and looking towards what we call the end of braking point. But you also need to be kind of looking into the apex and beyond the apex. So it's like your eyes are kind of looking for that end of braking point towards the end of the braking zone, and also then flicking into past the apex, then back and forth, and you've got to keep your eyes scanning that way.
In terms of braking, the cars are remarkably stable in this section, even though there is a slight banking where the left side of the road as you're approaching this corner is higher than the right-hand side of the road. But I think everyone, and this goes for big heavy cars as well, can accelerate at least until the 500 marker. These markers are quite visible. You may see red lines painted vertically underneath them. The Speedway changes these up from event to event and year to year. So we have provided all of those indicators for your use.
And again, this is why it's so important that you study a track. You need to find reference points are constantly changing, right?
Absolutely. They're living things. We talk about this a lot. Very often when you commit specific details and come back and rely on those details to get you where you need to go, and they're gone, you can be lost. So it's really important to attach multiple landmarks.
And again, as you're coming down into the brake zone, it's tricky because you've got your eyes looking up. The brake reference points are up on the fence, up on the far side on the left. Your eyes are trying to scan over towards the apex over on your right. This is such a great passing zone as well.
It is.
And we're you see so much passing going on here that it's important to also have brake reference points that help guide you if you're on the inside to the right of this and you can't see those markers up on the fence on the left hand side. And that's again why it's so important also to have to be able to look down to your end of braking point so you can judge where you're going to start to brake, even though you don't have that brake point where you're going to start braking off to the left hand side up on the fence.
Well, I think that's the great value of your approach in terms of end of braking. I think people too often think about the beginning of braking and leave for naught the end of braking. And here is a prime example. Most of these corners, especially the infield road course at Indy, rely on carrying a little bit of brake past initial turn-in to keep the nose weighted and get the car to begin to change direction more quickly. Because if you rely on just a sheer release of the brake and you go back to throttle prematurely, you can really cook yourself.
And I was going to ask you, I mean, your experience driving your S2000 into here, trail braking in this corner in the cars that I've worked with here, from Formula BMWs to prototype cars to GT cars, you know, they've been able to get the car to turn in here and rotate in here. Again, you've got to be disciplined. You've got to have the nice crisp turn in, but the brake release is what gets the car to rotate into the corner.
That's right.
Your experience?
Yes, absolutely. And you've got to release the brake. You've got to leave enough brake to release the brake after the turn-in.
Yes. And it's interesting how so often you see drivers who they come off the brake, and the reason they come off the brake is because they go, well, I've slowed down enough. Mm-hmm. And what it is, their whole brake zone needs to shift in.
That's right.
And, you know, I mean, anybody that's spent any time around me and, you know, I use this, right? Mm-hmm. You know, this is where you start braking. This is where you end braking. And sometimes you just need to move the whole brake zone in. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times we get to this point where we kind of just, we'll compress it. We'll move this in. Right. We'll start braking later, but we don't move the end of braking point in. And really what we're talking about here in this corner is sometimes to find more speed here is you move the whole brake zone in. So start later and end later.
Absolutely. So we're going to ask most people, I think, to start their turn-in later and work back.
Yes.
Instead of picking arbitrarily, no car should leave the left edge of the road before their left shoulder is at the 100 mark. But some bigger, heavier cars may need to go a little bit later, close to the logo on the wall, or if in the absence of that, 2 car lengths past the 100 marker before they initiate turn-in. It's really going to be important to get that backside of the curb, apex curb as indicated by C in the slide.
And I think the challenge finding that turn-in point here is there is no hard, definite reference point. Mm-hmm. You know, it's not like there's a curbing down the outside edge of the track that you turn in at the end of the curbing, or 3 blue panels before the end of the curbing, or whatever, or a crack in a pavement. Indy doesn't have a lot of cracks in pavements. The surface is pretty incredible.
It's beautiful,
and that's good. But it's also bad because there is no hard, always turn in at the crack or the seam in the pavement. You've got to find this, and it's more of a visual thing, mm-hmm. in that you've got to be looking around the corner, yep. and going, that's where I want to be, and that determines where I turn in.
So let's assume that you are turning in even with the 100 marker. You're going to approach the inside curbing of turn 1. The curbings are quite wide. They're easily seen because they have alternating blue, dark blue, and white paint. And this is pretty standard fare around the Indy road course, but it's going to be important to get that right front tire on that soft, gentle bevel, not over top of the crown, but get that right front tire over top of that.
So what you're saying is we can use the curbs, mm-hmm. but respect them.
But respect them, exactly. I mean, it's easy in a big car, if you're approaching the curb and it looks like you're not going to make it, to breathe off the throttle, transfer the weight forward, and then when the right front does touch the curb, it knocks the car around a little bit. We'll see that definitely later in this track. Okay. So here we are at turn 1, heading forward. Turn 2 and 3. Turn 2 is a very long apex. If you look at this whole track from above, it's more than 90 degrees to the left. So it's more than a right angle to the left. It's tighter.
So coming up from the bottom right here and working our way up to the top left on this view, you're talking about keeping the car? Are you, I guess, holding the apex a little bit at turn 2 before releasing it back towards turn 3, right?
Exactly. And opposed to releasing it, applying throttle so progressively yet aggressively that the car walks away from the inside apex curbing at turn 2
Right.
naturally towards the exit curbing, which you will just tow against for as long as you can through turn 3.
Okay.
So here we are looking from above. You can see the geometry. You can actually see a lime outline of the racetrack going into turn 1 from the bottom right-hand side of the screen, going towards the A. You can see the pit exit, which is near the, just right behind the A arrow. So people will be coming on the track, drivers right in that short straight between the exit of 1 and the entry of turn 2, again, in the A area. And then you're going to want to hold that curbing in turn 2 through the letter B, and then accelerate hard to allow the car to slide across the width of the road to the inside curb. You're going to want to hold that curb at least until the concession building, which is notated by the C arrow, before you begin to think about allowing the car to track out to the left.
Have you used the escape road?
I have. Unfortunately, I've used the escape road a couple of times, and it's very good. The most important thing you need to realize is when you use the escape road, stop. There is a worker station directly across the racetrack at the exit of turn 2 between B and C, equidistant on the other side, near the end of the sand pit. And you need to look at that worker station and get an affirmative signal before you rejoin the track.
And this is where obviously you have to pay attention to the rules for your event. Different organizations have different rules around how you treat escape roads and what you can and can't do, and whether they're going to have cones set up in there or tire walls or something like that. So every organization's got a little bit different. Every now and then they tell us something at a driver's meeting that's worthwhile, right?
I guess that's why we go, right?
Exactly, yeah.
It's very important.
Yeah.
But that second pass-through is there for just in case you need it. It is always important to have an exit plan, especially going from virtually the terminal velocity of any car at this track to a very slow corner.
And I think, this view also shows that, you turn into turn 1, which is pretty much a 90-degree right-hand corner, and you can see in this one where turn 2 is actually more than 90 degrees, right?
That's right.
Yeah. And that's why I think you have to hold that apex just for a fraction so you're set up to get a good run out of there.
That's exactly right. So here, looking inside the car, we've exited turn 1. We're climbing basically the hill. You can see a little extra macadam and asphalt on the left-hand side before the beginning of the inside curb. But that right front tire needs to be close to the center line of the track, and the seams are pretty visible in the road course here.
Mm-hmm. And again, because the track is so flat here, you say, you're climbing the elevation here. It's not a huge elevation, right? And that's why this track, I think, is tricky, because it's just so flat and it's hard to see where you're going.
Mm-hmm. But you know where the car works and the car doesn't. The car is going to work here. The car is not going to work when you begin to turn steering unless you have some weight on the front.
So you were saying earlier that for some cars it's a lift of the throttle. Other cars it's going to be I hate to say a full-on brake, but at least a brush of the brake.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a full-on brake in any of the cars that I've seen.
Right.
But almost every front-engine car and cars that have some significant amount of inertia, mass, need that weight on the front, because you can squirt it pretty good. And if the car is very powerful, you're definitely going to need to whoop, whoop.
So it's a brush of the brake more to transfer weight than it is to change the speed.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's only going to be very, very short. It
Yeah.
should be, if you have an opportunity to review your speed versus distance data, you would only want to see a little hiccup, almost as if you were making a mistake at the exit of a corner and had to breathe out of it to keep from going off.
Right. Okay.
On turn 3, very simple and straightforward. We just keep it to the right. You can see that often people go over the right-hand edge. It's easy to do, but the curbing is very friendly here. It's graduated in such a way that close to the verge line and the track proper, it's pretty smooth and reasonably easy to use. But as you go to the midpoint and beyond, it can be very rough.
So avoid the landscaping work.
That's right. You'll see in some organizations, in some venues, and some competitions where people prize the idea of putting their inside front wheel. And this is something that we do in real life track walks and something we'd encourage you to do in our screenshots that we use in our virtual track walks. Where the fastest people go is where the verge line paint and the curving paint and the landscaping gets torn up in a particular area around the curb. And I think that's something that we take in a great deal when we do this in real life.
Yeah, yeah. We're constantly looking for these references, right? And, a lot of them are visual.
Mm-hmm.
But there are some that we feel.
That's right.
There's some that we hear.
That's true.
I mean, there's that sound of a tire going over the rumble strips, right?
As long as we don't smell it.
Yes. Want to avoid that part of it. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah, yeah. Or taste it, because dirt tastes bad.
No, dirt tastes bad.
Yeah,
so we, in this particular case, we have some very good information, and we can say a couple of generalities for a variety of different cars. Most important thing you can do going into turn one is a clean transition from wide open throttle to brake.
So what we have here is a speed trace coming down the front straight, something above 200. What's that? 210
kilometers an hour.
K at the beginning of the graph.
Yep.
Getting up to about 230 or so before they start to brake.
Yep.
Heavy braking, big deceleration, squirt of the throttle coming out of turn one, and then there's that speed adjustment and weight transfer that you were talking about, right? And that's where the speed drops down at C here, correct?
That's right. That's right. And you can see that even in a small bore or a smaller displacement formula car, you're talking about taking off quite a bit of speed going into here.
Right.
But the dwell period, or the area where you slow down to and then you accelerate from, needs to be very short, left to right. In a graph like this, you would want it V-shaped, not U-shaped. Faster corners, we want to see the U-shape, but this corner, we want to stop the car and turn the car.
Yeah. So it's a rotation type of corner. You got to get the car to turn, rotate into the corner, and then get on the throttle and go. As you say, wide open throttle, short burst. Way to go.
Well, one of the things that Chris Brown used to work at Motec, does a lot of his own consulting now, was really helpful in explaining to me was that sort of dog leg, that breathe off at the end, or that ebbing of the steep downward stroke in the braking zone towards the end, is rolling off of the brake, as you say, that end of braking point, and creating, trading some of that braking force for cornering force and initiating that rotation.
It's all about that timing and rate of release of the brakes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So here, next section, turns 3, 4, 5, and 6 for the most popular configuration of the course that is run. Turn 4 is a medium speed right with a long central section. See, this is where one of those places where the folks that designed this course and put this course together really wanted to throw a little bit of a curveball to the drivers. We're going to see this more than once at this track, but the idea that you've turned in and your radius can be fixed thereafter, no.
I love corners like this because they're not simple. There's so many corners on a lot of modern tracks that are, they're drawn on a CAD system, and obviously this was as well. But there was a little character designed into it. And I think that's what makes this, this corner reminds me of a corner that was designed the old way tracks were designed, where the bulldozer drove through the woods, right? And this corner it's designed on CAD, but it was designed in the same way to give you that same kind of feel. It's a character corner.
Absolutely, it's a character corner because you have a situation where you have a fairly significant entry radius that opens fairly quickly. Then it stays open for a while, and then it tightens up again. Your goal is to make one arc through here with the rotation and the slip angle that is most desirable to get the car pointed in the direction soonest so that you can make that progression to wide open throttle. But this is a very frustrating corner, and that is something that I've heard from many people that I've worked with here and experienced myself. You have a situation where most people turn early here, And most people crab away from the left edge of the road, don't drive deep enough, and then they're frustrated when they turn the wheel and nothing happens. They see the inside apex curb moving away from them rather than coming up to them.
So I guess the question is, why do they tend to crab in and then get frustrated?
Well, I think their eyes aren't moving enough.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it goes back to what you talk about going into turn one, where you're looking at the braking markers on the left-hand side, trying to discipline yourself to stay to the left, to the outside, and then picking a point and initiating that steering input. It's got to be a decisive steering input. All of these corners are slow to medium speed, which means that you're going to carry a good head of steam in that short straightaway between the end of turn 3 and the entry of turn 4. It's another great passing opportunity. So you've got to work on your braking capability here because you want to draw alongside somebody and take the choice of their turning into the corner away from them.
In your experience, how much braking is there for turn 4 here?
I think it's pretty significant. I mean, almost every car that I've seen and worked with and had good fortune to drive, I am hauling ass. I'm going fast, and I've got to get the car slowed down. More than that, I've got to leave enough braking until past the initiation of steering to keep that weight on that left front tire to get the car to begin to rotate.
So again, it's a trail brake, release the brakes nicely, using the end of braking, how you release the brakes to help you get the car to rotate on the angle that you want so that then you can get back to throttle soon.
That's right. And, you know, every driver is impatient. They all want to go back to that throttle. That throttle is like a seductress, a siren. You know, it's amazing.
I think if we were patient people, we wouldn't be in this sport, right?
That's probably true.
So there's one other thing that I want to touch on, when we were talking about vision here, and I think this is a great example of this. And a fellow coach I was talking to, Jeff McCaig, a little while ago. He's also a sports vision trainer, and he used this great analogy of, you know, the old connect the dot drawings.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you take a pencil and you draw it from 1 to 2, and then you draw it from 2 to 3. If you only look from 1 to 2, and you draw your line there, and then you look to number 3, and you draw a line to there, and then you look to number 4, and you draw a line to there, you're going to have a series of straight lines.
Mm-hmm.
If, while you're taking your pencil and drawing from 1 to 2, you're starting to also look to 3, and where 4 is, you're going to start to make a curve. And it's the same kind of thing here. You know, you've got to keep your eyes moving. And this is a corner that I think the frustration a lot of times is you come up to it and kind of looking really at the turn-in point, and then you look to the apex, and then you look to the exit, and it's connecting the dots one at a time, and you need to be at least 2 or 3 dots ahead.
The reason I shake my head is because that is relevant to every discussion I've had with a driver on this corner. Yeah. This is a critical corner. In this most popular course configuration, turn 5, turn 6, the chicane leading onto the Holman Straight is really a non-issue for a lot of cars, for a majority of the cars, I would say, that I've worked with.
Right.
And I'm talking about big cars, powerful cars that can accelerate very strongly out of turn 4 and approach turn 5 and 6 at a great rate of speed, and are resistant to changing direction, big, heavy cars. So the key here is to optimize that progression to wide open throttle, and do so by giving up a little in the beginning to get later on.
So what's important is your exit speed off of 4, because in this configuration, it's almost a straightaway all the way to turn 7.
That's right.
Now, if you're going to be using the alternative layout where turn 5 becomes a right-hand corner,
I still think that's relevant because that right-hander into the alternate configuration, the turn 6, turn 6A configuration, which is what we're referring to, is just a broad sweeping arc to the right with an apex curb on the right. We don't have pictures of that, unfortunately, but the car is going to track out from turn 4 in no circumstances. Normally, I wouldn't track out all the way to the left side of the road at the exit of turn 4 for either configuration. However, in the alternate configuration, the turn 5, turn 6, turn 6A, you're going to bend right where it says turn 5, and that sweeper is very, very quick. Doesn't require much speed moderation from almost any car that is likely to be run through here.
Right. So what I just heard was you coming out of turn 4, not necessarily using all that track out to the left-hand side because you want to get set up for turn 5, correct?
That's right.
Yeah.
Let's take a look what it looks like in the car.
Yep.
So here we are looking from above. This is another great opportunity to see that broad, open central section. You've got a tight entry. Now, the yellow line is not necessarily where you should be. In particular, this was most likely a lap from a passing area where the overtaking car, the path of the yellow line was right of center. Ordinarily, you would be to the left of center. You would turn in generally between 4 and 6 car lengths before the end of the left-hand curbing on the left lower side of the screen. But you would be patient. You would be against the inside curbing for some period of time, and you would accelerate out. Then, bringing the arc around to the right, you'd turn in at the top right-hand side of the screen from just right of center, and that would straighten that chicane out.
So again, turn-in point being 4 to 6 panels from the end of the curbing on the left-hand side, coming up from that bottom left-hand corner there, and coming up there, turning in 4 to 6 panels from the end.
Let's take a look. There we are. 4 to 6 panels from the end on the left-hand lower side of the screen. We're going to see a period of yellow. This is the area, this is the frustration zone. I'm going to stop calling it understeer, push. I'm just going to say frustration.
Right.
Because every time I listen to people yell and scream, it's like, oh, the car won't turn, and there's a reason why.
So a little bit of patience here.
A little bit of patience can pay big dividends.
Right.
Here we are. We have several red apex markers at turn 4 to keep you inside against that area. You're going to track out roughly at the B arrow, and you're going to bring the car in a straight line on a diagonal from the left half of the road to the right of center of the road in preparation for a straight shot through turn 5, turn 6. We're continuing the arc from B, driving across that road, connecting the dots between turn 5 and turn 6 in a straight line. The curbings are relatively friendly, but the most important thing you can do, get the entry of turn 4 right.
Mm-hmm. So again, a little bit of patience, discipline. It will cut down on your frustration level. You can't guarantee that it's going to eliminate it.
Now, one thing that I see people often do is release the brakes prematurely, which causes the nose of the car to come up. Then they turn the steering wheel and the car doesn't turn. So,
in my experience is most times when drivers release the brakes too soon, it's because they don't have their eyes looking far enough, looking towards that end of braking point. They're overly focused on the beginning and not getting your eyes forward enough.
That's a great relationship to indicate. So turn in towards the end of turn 4 entry curb in the distance. It is very, very difficult to fix this landmark. It is really, really hard. I can tell you from being inside the car, you just can't see very easily the turn-in point. But you can see the beginning of the curb in the distance, and you know that your end of brake point is going to be a few panels from the end. Just keep your eyes scanning, keep your eyes moving.
And just clarifying, we're in turn 3 essentially here, approaching turn 4, and you're looking at that, trying to identify where that turn-in point is off in the distance, correct?
That's exactly
And it's
right.
because of that slight crown, slight elevation change that makes it difficult to see. And in the background, there's a lot going on, but nothing specific that you can go, there it is.
That's right.
There is no tree, there's no pole, there's nothing that you just go, that point. However, with the grandstands there, eventually in your car, you're going to pick up something there.
That's right. And in this particular case, the junction between the red seat area and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway logo on the back of a dark gray area between right exactly where the A arrow is going to be that where I'm going to lead my eyes and then allow my eyes to drop to that point.
Of course, when you are driving here, you're going to have hundreds of thousands of spectators in those stands, so you're going to have to pick out the one with the nice hat.
I was waiting for us to get into the fact that we are in front of 300,000 screaming fans.
Exactly, yes. Yeah.
So here we are, entering turn 4, the left side of the car parallel with the left side of the road.
Great view.
Patience, patience, patience.
Okay.
Here we are, moving away. You can actually see a significant amount of steering input on this on our camera car. It's a late, long apex. He's got to travel distance before he adds more steering. Otherwise, he's going to come to the inside he's going to come to the inside too soon.
And I like this view because it really shows that this apex is kind of wrapped around, it's around the backside of the curbing there. It's easy for our eyes to be attracted to that curbing at the beginning and just drive it straight to it. But we got to think of this arc around to the backside of the curbing.
It is really important, and this is a common theme for all of our track walks, don't you think?
Yeah.
So here we are. We want to apex or apex. Use the apex area. You can actually see the white verge paint worn as the inside front tires. Our camera car's not quite there. He's adding more steering input. He's desperately trying to get in there. He's pointed at the square scoring pylon to the right of the Jumbotron at the intersection. Those are permanent landmarks. You can use those. They also serve to lift your eyes.
And it could be that at this point in time, this driver is dealing with a little bit of understeer. And that's why there's a little bit of, the natural reaction to understeer is dial in a little bit more steering. And that's okay for a little bit, but eventually when you need to get that grip back, you got to bring the steering straighten back up a little bit, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So here we are, exiting turn 4. I'm aiming for a pair of trees under the A arrow. There's a single tree to the left, a single tree to the right, the pagoda further to the right, but it's large grove. Drive straight for it. You have several visible pavement lifts or lanes, the seams being lighter colored straight lines parallel with the car in this photograph, and you can still see the steering input with our driver.
So hold the exit arc to get the car to arc back around to get set up for turn 5.
That's correct. Now, if you're driving the alternate configuration, that arrow C is where I'm looking at because I'm going to want to delay my turn in to optimize the passage through turn 5.
Right.
To the right, you can actually see the apex curbing on the right for turn 5, just beyond the B arrow on the right. But for the most popular configuration, we are going to be trying to shoot towards getting to right of center before turning back to the left and heading through the chicane.
Mm-hmm.
So here is a data trace looking at a good trace for 3. I think the most important thing people need to realize is that they are accelerating hard through 3. Every car, any size, any venue, any organization, you should be driving with wide open throttle through that long sweeper to the right.
And that's shown through the speed increase through the A section.
That is correct. So indicated by the A arrow, this is that broad open sweep around to the right and preparing for a parallel, breaking in a straight line, parallel with the left-hand side of the curb, pretty aggressively, which begins sharply initially at the B arrow and then starts releasing almost immediately, but carrying enough brake past steering initiation so that you can get down to the curbing. You can see at B, hard initial brake, then trail it in. But the most important thing is that throttle application. I think, again, it's easy to wait until you're sure you're going to make it before you apply more. I see a lot of drivers stepped throttle through here, which means they select a partial throttle opening sufficient to accelerate the car but not significantly. Then they realize all of a sudden as they get to the apex curbing, oh, I've got more.
Right. And
how often do you see that?
Oh, too often. How about two?
Yeah.
Too often. Not two drivers, too often. Drivers get on the throttle, cause a little weight transfer to the rear. Front gets a little light. The front kind of washes a little bit. Now they're heading in, they're running out of road, and then they have to do a little breathe of the throttle. Again, it's not where you start to pick up the throttle. It's where you get to full throttle, to wide open 100% throttle that counts. So that's where the patience comes from. You need to be a little bit patient to make sure that the car has rotated, changed direction enough so that when you go to throttle, you commit to throttle.
Absolutely. So here we are through the chicane, driving from the left to the right. We're going to probably middle apex. You don't want to touch the turn 5 apex curbing before the midpoint. This is another great shot. If you look below 5 and 6 on this particular slide, you can see the apex curbing of the alternate configuration, turn 5. and you are going to, because there's a nice exit curbing in the bottom central section of the screen, you're going to want a middle apex. You're going to want to hold that curbing for a little bit and then let the car track out driver's left at the bottom central of the screen for the alternate.
But if you're driving we'll call it the normal layout, this 5-6
is a non-issue.
It's fast.
It's really fast.
Yeah.
It's all about lining up that line between 5 and 6. Because if you do that, you're going to be in pretty good shape. Some organizations, I have observed at this particular facility, right where the turn 6 sign is, in an effort to keep people from cutting that apex, will put things large and solid to hit. Rows of tires, other things. You really need to get this right. Don't just bull your way through.
Right. And yes, I mean, I've seen, the big cones, the big heavy cones, or a stack of tires, which can be a little dangerous. The good news is that if you really messed up, and it would be difficult to mess up that badly here, but if you really did and you were going to hit one of those things, you do have room to drive on the backside of it. And you can see, yes, you're going to be plowing some dirt as you go through that grass, but you could then kind of just angle it back, just a slight angle. You're going to be back on the Holman Straight.
So again, just like turn 1, plot your exit strategy in case stuff goes wrong.
Yeah.
So here we are approaching. We can see at letter A the seam between asphalt lanes, and we want to bisect that. We want to go over that. We want to drive over it. Our driver is a little impatient. He's got a light car that changes direction quickly, so he's just taking the shortest line between 2 points and just driving from the middle of the road to the left. But you can see that he's got a fair bit of room between the left side of his car and the left edge of the road here in preparation for going through B and C.
And Peter, you and I have talked about the whole concept or the whole, I'm going to say almost myth that, well, I drive so-and-so car, that means my line is completely different than your line. And, we believe that's overdone. Yes, there are subtle differences. This is one place where you might see a subtle difference. If you're in a big, heavy, but really fast, high horsepower car, you may have to come out of 4 and get the car set up further to the right-hand side to get through turn 5.
And I'm going to say do that first.
Yes. If you're in a small, nimble, light, momentum, open-wheel car like this, you can afford to drive, as you say, the shortest distance through there. You don't need to go all the way out to the right to bring it back over. Mm-hmm. You can keep it, this is more middle of the road here.
But you can see the trickery at work again, because that radius at C arrow is tighter to the right than the radius at the B arrow to the left. They're trying to suck you in.
Kind of like Hinch says, right?
He's got lots of practice here, for sure.
Yeah.
So here we are at turn 5. We've got the left front tire on the curbing. He's going to be as aggressive as he can, but doesn't have a great deal of steering input here. Not a great deal of steering input. We're trying to drive fairly straight when we get to this point. Lengthen the turn 5 apex. Lengthen it right against it until you can drive over the B turn 6 apex curbing with your right side tires. Don't release prematurely.
So this is all about how little input can you put into the steering and get through this section. Really trying to release the car, turn the steering wheel as little as possible. I think about, we go to an indoor go-kart track. You know that every single time you turn that steering wheel, it just slows the cart down, right? Mm-hmm. Think about that as you're going through this section. Think about putting in as little steering as possible because you're trying to let the car run as free as possible through this section.
In most cars, this chicane is going to be a non-issue. There's really not going to be much, if any, throttle moderation required. However, as you learn this place, if you're going to make a speed adjustment going into the chicane, do so at the exit of turn 4 before the entrance of turn 5, before you turn left.
Like we talk about a lot of times, fast corners, if you're going to make that speed adjustment, do it early in the fast corners. Slow corners, you can make that speed adjustment late. But in a fast corner like this, if you have to make some speed adjustment, do it early and be on power as you go through this thing. And in most cars, on power, we mean flat to the floor.
Right. Well, I really liked a discussion we've had before about how to work up to flat.
Yeah.
And I'd just like you to say something about that
Well,
because you have unique experience at this venue.
so at this venue, not on this circuit, but driving the oval, I remember going through rookie orientation to drive leading up to the 500 in '93, going through rookie orientation, and then the week following, I'm out practicing, and I'm walking through Gasoline Alley, and Dick Simon, one of the the old timers from the Speedway, came along and gave me this tip. He says, turn one's hard to do flat, right? And I said, you bet it is. And he says, so lift at the start finish line. I'm like, what? That's like 18 miles before turn one. And he says, just lift at the start finish line, lift, coast for a while, and then go flat to the floor well before turn one. And then you build the habit of being flat to the floor all the way through turn one. And the car is better balanced and it has more grip that way. If you enter turn one and you do a lift as you're trying to turn in, the car is moving
It's potentially
around.
catastrophic.
Yeah. So, you do that and you lift at the start finish line, coast for a little bit, go flat to the floor. And then each time you just shorten up that amount of time that you're out of throttle. Eventually, you drive down the front straightaway with your foot pinned to the floor and you turn in, your foot flat to the floor, and you get through turn one and you go, oh, there is nothing better in the world.
Well, the light bulb that came on when you recounted that story to me initially was you always pick the same point to go back to wide open throttle.
Right.
So the key was not changing the location of going back to wide open throttle, but changing the point at which you breathe and the duration which you breathe.
Correct.
But
Correct.
leave the end, going back to wide open throttle, fixed.
And before the turn in. Because then you just build this habit of being on power, full throttle. The car is balanced, it has grip, and you're just through turn one.
Well,
and it's no different than this type of a corner.
That's correct. And you relate that to the steering input.
Yeah.
And already have put that right foot to bed and focus totally on your steering.
And then, if you're, because we're talking about the oval here as well, is, you drive the oval here and it's all about how little steering input can you put in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's no different than going through a chicane like this where you're trying to get through there putting as little steering in as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Because the steering wheel in these types of, this type of section of track, the steering wheel is a brake.
Yes.
And the less steering you put in, the less you slow the car.
That's right. So we're headed over turn 6, Apex. Our camera car is ambitious. You can see where cars have actually ground down the very top crown, listed A, taking some of the paint off the top of that beveled curbing. The curbing is beveled, so there's a bevel on the other side, on the right-hand side as we look at this picture to the right of the A. And then there's also a bevel which is helpful to the left-hand side of the A, and that is where I'd normally put people's tires.
Yeah.
Your inside tires.
And I love, look how little steering he's got put in the car right now.
Yep.
He's just trying to let the car run as free as possible through here.
That's right. And his eyes are way, way down the track right now. He is not looking at the leading edge of the exit curb, and you shouldn't either. You should be looking at the far end of the exit curbing on the left-hand side. This is actually, I was surprised to learn that the Holman Strait or Holman Boulevard, which we're about to exit onto, is a public road.
And, the other thing is, physically, he's looking towards that exit point and beyond, but mentally, he's at the end of the Holman straightaway.
He is.
Mentally, he's already starting to think about, what am I going to do at turn 7?
That's right.
Yeah.
So here we are, trekking out at turn 6. Left side tires against the curbing. We're going to let the car run free, get out there. Some organizations will sanction or prohibit cars from moving over to the left of the verge line where the curbing is and beyond. They want people to be in the right half of the road. It's 48 feet wide. There's plenty of room. You're going to drive on a diagonal in a straight line from the track out point of turn 6, where we are now, to the right-hand side of the bridge in the distance.
And I think one other thing that this image shows is, if for whatever reason you get this wrong, look at all that track out there.
Oh, it's nice.
If you ran out of road, just open your hands, run over on the back side of the curbing. You're not going to get penalized for doing it once.
No.
If you do it consistently, yes. But in this case, just open your hands and run wide. Okay.
So here is another tricky section of the track. We talked about 1, 2, 3, 4. Now we're going to talk about 7, 8, 9. I think this is an area where a majority of drivers have the greatest amount of variation in their performance, in their sector performance. When I measure people going through here, there are two approaches that people often take through the 7, 8, 9 area. Some of that is whether or not people feel comfortable aggressively accelerating and then perhaps either breathing or brushing the brake to get the direction change done, weight the nose. Turn 8 is tighter than it looks. And it's very important that at the exit of turn 9 that you not track out all the way to the right edge of the road.
Because you need to set up for turn 10, this big right-hander.
Yeah, exactly. Turn 10 is the beginning of a significant and substantial straightaway, bending around turn
curving
11.
straightaway.
Curving straightaway, exactly.
Yeah.
And then leading onto a straight line braking zone on the short chute between the exit of the oval turn 1 and turn 2.
Mm-hmm.
Decisive turn in at turn 7. Go deep, turn a lot. It's just like turn 1. It's important not to track out fully. It is absolutely the flipped version of turn 1, turn 2.
Right.
This is turn 7. Turn 8, it is the latest, longest apex area to open. You want to have this long, latest apex area to be able to open the entry into turn 9. The turn 9 apex, pretty comfortable, not a big issue, but you are crossing the crown of the road. And I would say that most people feel a chassis instability in this area more than many others. That transition between the end of the right at turn 8 and the entry of turn 9 can often create some tank slappers or areas where people begin to lose one end of the car, and then because they have to change direction, it snaps the other way. So be careful and work up through this turn 8, turn 9 do-si-do.
So which are the corners that we sacrifice? Obviously we want to take advantage of 7, but we also want to focus on making sure we get a great run out of 9 through 10. Do we sacrifice 8?
Well, I think we do, to a certain degree.
I don't mean throw it away completely.
No.
But, do we kind of, we sacrifice a little bit of the exit of 7
Mm-hmm.
to get set up for 8, but we sacrifice a little bit of 8 to get set up for 9.
Right. So let's talk about that. We don't want anybody to beat us to 8. Okay? In a competition, in a competitive situation, we don't want anybody to beat us to 8. So we have to be at wide open throttle as we come off of the apex of turn 7.
Right.
We are going to have to slow the car to be able to get down to the proper late apex in turn 8. So whether you do that by a breathe or brush of the brake, you're going to have to give up something. That makes it easy or easier to sacrifice turn 8 to get the entry that you want through turn 9.
Right.
Then you can accelerate progressively through 9 and really not have an issue with washing out too wide at the exit.
Right. So if we're going to sacrifice something, turn 8.
Lengthen the transitions to settle the car. Not uncommon to have understeer or and oversteer at 9, understeer at 8, oversteer at 9. Again, that sort of snappiness. Allow the cars to settle between the direction change just for a moment. It makes so much of a difference here, and it mitigates the adverse camber that is often present in this back section.
Right.
Looking at the overview, you can see the nice parabola moving from the bottom left to the top right. You can see that this is quite a late turn-in. Actually, the beginning of the last grassy patch on the right-hand side is the point where you leave the right edge of the road. We'll see that from the in-car. It is very important that you touch the inside curbing at the midpoint or just beyond in order not to track out all the way to the right-hand side. But this is a great shot and really shows you how difficult it is to touch these island curbings. We have this in turn 1. We've got this here. It's kind of tough because you've got an expanse of black on the left, an expanse of black asphalt on the right. Where is it? It's like an island floating out there.
And again, visually challenging. I think the other thing that's interesting, when I look at this, I kind of go, oh, interesting that the exit of the corner, there is not a curbing on the outside edge.
Right.
Well, the reason is that people aren't going to go way over there, at least on purpose.
Or people aren't going way over there.
Because they need to get the car set up for turn 8 back to the right. And, if this was a normal track leading onto a straightaway, well, we'd see a lot of tire marks in the grass over there on the far right, or we'd see a curbing over there.
That's right.
Yeah.
And this is something that you would do on a normal track walk in real life.
Yeah.
Is look at where these curbs are placed. I mean, the curbing is a guide. It tells you where people are most likely to reach the edges of the track, and when there is not,
yeah,
it reinforces exactly what we talked about.
Yep.
So here we are going into the braking zone. The braking zone again starts with the 500 marker, just like turn one. In every car I have worked with and seen, be it big old ground pounder vintage Trans Am cars to modern GT1 cars to sports prototypes to very, very quick cars capable of a high terminal velocity. And you will be going nearly as quickly as you are going into one right here, especially if you take 5 and 6 correctly. You can accelerate at least to the 500 point. So I'm asking people to think, instead of initiating brake, accelerate to.
Yes. And my experience is the same thing. I mean, you're going to be inside that 500 somewhere. There are going to be some that are going to have a little longer brake zone, but most cars are going to be down there. And again, this one you can see from this angle here. I mean, this view, it's difficult to see where you're going to be ending your braking, where you're going to be apexing for this corner. You look down there right now, and it's like, well, where is it?
It's funny. I look at us craning our heads, trying to identify where that turn-in point is. I mean, it's just like looking for the entry of turn one on the oval.
So can I do this?
I think it'll help you get better. I don't know. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But the turn-in is far away. So here we're getting a little bit closer. Here we are at the 200-meter board, or 200-foot board. We have vertical red lines in this particular event, which may or may not be there when you go. But you're going to always have the 200 brake board on the right-hand side. You also have 200 brake boards on the left-hand side for larger events. So it is quite likely you're going to come in here side by side, sometimes 2, sometimes 3, and I have seen 4 abreast.
Great passing
going
zone.
Into this braking zone because it is a great passing zone.
And sometimes too great, meaning it's too inviting.
It is.
And people will do
some
questionable things here.
Well, I think the most important thing is that everybody be aware of each other. Keep your eyes up and moving. Don't become so fixated that you aren't aware of your spatial position relative to other people near you.
Yeah.
But the fastest way through this section is always going to be the most geometrically open entry, just like we talked about at turn 1. You've got to be right next to the edge of the road before you initiate that turn-in, don't you?
Again, you have to be disciplined. Got to be disciplined on that turn-in point. And I think it shows more in corners like this where you've got a long straight approaching, so nice brake zones. Difficult visually to see the apex, so it kind of you're constantly trying to look into there, and it's really easy for you to crab the car or move the car away from the edge of the track. And this is an area that as coaches, this is kind of low-hanging fruit, right?
It is super.
We either watch in-car video or we watch from the outside of the track or something, and we go, hey, you're 2 feet from the edge of the track at the turning point. Right. That's easy stuff.
Easy stuff.
Yeah.
Low-hanging fruit. So the last thing in this photograph, we can see the beginning of the last grassy patch on the right-hand side, right at the 100 board, which is at the A arrow in this particular slide. You can actually also, if you move your eyes to the left slightly, you can see the island apex hanging out there.
It's hard to see, but it's there.
It is. So here we are, much closer. This is a really, really good shot of the beginning of the grass, the turn-in point at A, your right-hand shoulder, even with the 1, before you come away from that white verge line. You can see actually the steering of the camera car tilted just to the right. You know why? He wants to widen his entry, so he is going to get it to the point where his right front wheel is on that verge line, because at this level of competition for our camera car, this sort of discipline earned our camera car pole for this particular race.
And that's what it takes. Looking for those subtle little, if there's an extra 2 inches of track, use it.
That's right.
Now, I understand that there are some drivers who will be doing some events at this track who, pole is not
No.
worth anything.
No. So we get our excited, blood pressure.
Yeah. But, if you really want to be the best driver you can be, you want to go get the low-hanging fruit. I look at drivers and I go, if they're giving themselves 2 or 3 feet on the entry, that's just, they're giving it away. If they're giving
Let's cut that in half.
Yeah. If they're giving that 2 or 3 feet at the exit, I understand that. I respect that.
Right.
Because that's where things can go wrong. And you're giving yourself a little bit of a margin for error.
Mm-hmm.
But on the entry to the corner, it's not difficult to drive the car right to the edge, even within 6 inches.
That's right.
And it's no more risky.
No.
In fact, you could make the argument it's less risky because therefore you're having a larger radius.
That's right.
You're putting less into the car. The car is going to be able to roll that speed through the corner.
But it's also back to what you always say, which is keep your eyes moving. Where people put wheels off when they're trying to get close to the edge of the track is because they become fixated on an area other than the point they're trying to go.
Oh, then we could get to my favorite of the, don't drive into the grass. Don't drive into the grass. Don't drive into the grass. That's like me saying, don't think about a pink elephant, right? What are you thinking about? A pink elephant. Yeah, right. So, line the car up, put the right front tire on that white line, that verge line.
That sounds great.
Yeah.
Here we are, coming away from the right edge of the road. Again, like turn 4, we're delaying that steering input because we know that the thing is going to tighten up. We don't want to be too far too left too soon. So we're going to just slow that steering input and get there. But we are decisively turning the steering wheel to the left to get the left front tire in at the A arrow in this particular slide.
And Peter, you and I have recently had some conversations around the rate of turning the steering wheel. And, some corners reward a kind of a slow, progressively quicker turn in. Mm-hmm. This type of corner requires or rewards the opposite of that. Mm-hmm. More of a fairly, not jerk on the steering wheel, but a more crisp turn in.
That's right.
A crisply turn in and get the car to arc around to that late apex.
That's right.
It's visually in this image, it's a little bit tricky because it looks like, wow, he's just kind of gradually put in. If we had the speed of his steering at that point, he'd be going through something fairly quick.
That's correct. And you can see behind and to the left of the A marker, you can see the back of the museum, which is another good aiming point in the lack of anything else. If you are disciplined enough to turn in at the proper place, you can draw a bead on the back of the museum, and that, if you drop your eyes from there, you're going to see it. But as you approach, that steering speed ramps up.
And what I like about this image as well is where the A arrow is pointing, it's pointing to the back side of the curbing. And it's really important. Again, visually, you see the curbing, you see the front of the curbing. And you've got to have the discipline of, I'm aiming for this arc that's going to get me to the back side of that curbing. It's like a downhill skier. They clip on the back side of the gates. In this case, we got to think about clipping on the back side of the curbing. Great autocrossers are like that.
That's right.
You clip on the back side of a cone. And, this type of corner, like this in turn 1, I think really rewards that mental discipline of thinking, I got to clip on the back side of that curbing.
That's great. So here we are, clipping the back side of the curbing. You can see actually the geometric center of it is the dark blue panel before the white panel before the A.
Yeah.
So we can see that we don't really want to intersect this curbing until we're aimed at the Jumbotron in the distance, which is indicated by the arrow B. That projects above all of the trees and buildings such that you can easily pick it out. And if you are aiming right of that Jumbotron when you touch that apex curbing, it's generally a pretty good indicator that you're early.
I thought you were pointing out the Jumbotron because that's another place that they'll have the camera on you. You can see yourself and you give yourself a little wave as you're going through. No, maybe not. Okay.
Yeah. So here we are looking from above, turn 8. We can see the length of the apex curbing. We can see the sinuous S that the driver drives from the bottom just left of center to the top right of center.
I think this shows a great, we talk about using all the track. Well, here we're not using all the track. We're not letting the car go all the way out to the right on the exit of 7. We're not getting the car all the way back over to the left to turn into turn 8 because there just isn't enough room in between.
That's right. Now, it's going to be important for most cars, almost all cars, to hustle that car out of turn 7. You want to beat the person, or you want to shorten the straightaway. If you're driving in a track day or a driver's education event, you want to shorten that straightaway until the next control input, which is going to be turning that wheel to the right.
I don't know of any car that you wouldn't be at wide open full throttle exiting turn 7.
Exiting turn 7, leading to turn 8.
Yeah.
So here we are. In the car, he's got lots of steering input. He's completing that radius to the left, exiting turn 7, and trying to get to a point left of center where the letter A is before he bends the car to the right. He's also acutely aware of how deep he is turning to the right. I think it's so easy to rush stuff, and you could get to left of center too soon and turn too soon. We really haven't talked much about that.
Yeah, and I think while we still see a lot of steering angle here, he has opened up the wheel a little bit because he's got to do that to get into full throttle.
Right.
But then he holds that steering angle because that kind of brings that arc back over to the left there, correct?
That's exactly right. So here he is actually pretty deep into the corner. We know that he's deep or forward, close to the entry of the corner, because we can now visually pick up the beginning of the inside curbing on the right-hand side.
Mm-hmm.
Now, here, I would say that the apex area, indicated by the letter B, is even further around.
It's a big, long corner.
Than the ones that we've seen before. I mean, this is sort of like turn 4.
Yes.
In the fact that we have to discipline ourselves to go a little bit further before we turn back to the right.
Well, and again, as we spoke earlier, if you're going to sacrifice something, you're going to sacrifice 8 a little bit to get set up for 9 so you can get a good run out of 9 and through and into 10. So I think you do need to be a little patient, just like we talked about in 4 on the entry. You need to be a little patient here to make sure that you're on the right line to this late apex.
Beautiful. Curbing, yes. Turn 8, really pretty curbing, very long leading section, long late section. But again, we're aimed at the same jumbotron that we were at the apex of turn 7. We really want to carry the car around to the right just a little longer than we think we ought to, so that you can open the entry to the left for turn 9.
Correct.
So here we are looking from above turn 9. You see the car from the bottom left of the screen leave the right-hand curbing and really actually, again, late apex at the midpoint and just beyond turn 9 in the center of the screen, and then again, not track out all the way to the right-hand side. That curbing on the right, especially in the car, is very inviting, but you don't want to go there yet.
And again, this is why this section needs to be thought about as a section. You can't think of any one particular corner in isolation.
That's right.
They're all linked.
So here we are looking in the car, looking at turn 9. We've left the curbing on the right-hand side. We're aimed towards the curbing for turn 9, the letter A, the arrow A. Here at the curbing at turn 9, it is exceptional, the amount of landscaping that has been done in this weekend.
They don't have to cut the lawn there, do they?
Well, they don't fine the drivers for messing up the speedway, at least not at this event, for sure. One of the permanent landmarks that can be used is that tall lamppost to the left of the administration building in the far end, and you can really see that the driver is using as much of the curb as possible on the left-hand side.
Yeah, I mean, we can see that it's a pretty flat curbing.
Yep.
Friendly.
You can see it is smoother, closer to the pavement surface, but it's not too bad up until the very edge.
So my question, I sit here and I look at this and I go, at what point is the track going to say, let's make that curbing a little less friendly, and therefore we don't have to fill in the dirt on the backside of the curbing? That may happen some point in the future.
That may happen at some point in the future, and we'll have to come back to that. But one of the interesting things I thought when I walked this physically was that the track does declinate or fall away a little bit at this point.
Right.
So it's very easy to get suckered in, to go into power early enough, and then creating a pushy situation. The reason why we know that this is a problem and confuses the car and confounds the driver is because look at the amount of steering input he has right now.
going to say this car is fighting a little bit of push right at
This
this
car
point.
is definitely fighting a little bit of push, and I think most cars do in this short section. And the difficulty is you don't have much time before you need to be left of center, because in my opinion, turn 10 is one of the pivotal corners of the course. Your success going through here is going to predicate your success all the way to the next big break zone.
And the other thing that'll factor into that is, I'm a big believer that the fast corners are what separates the fast drivers from the less than fast drivers. And turn 10 is a fast corner.
Turn 10 is a fast corner. It's much faster than it looks. It does require some slowing, but I have not yet seen any car that does not require some moderation going in.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a big deal when you get there.
Yeah.
So this is a look at braking zone for turn 7, acceleration up to 8, braking for 8 at C, accelerating up through 9. That speed moderation we talked about required for turn 10 at arrow D.
Yeah.
So even though this looks very similar to what we looked at in 1, 2, 3, 4, this is in fact 7, 8, 9, and 10 looking left to right on this graph.
And again, a couple of things I think that show up here in the trends are, if you look at the deceleration rate going into turn 7, from the A down to the B, right where the B arrow is, the deceleration rate changes, which is telling us that there's some trail braking going on into that. It's a very much of a V style corner, and it's hard acceleration heading towards 8. Right?
It is, boy, right where the cursor is right now with the X at the trace. I mean, he's pushing his right foot through the floorboard.
And I'm guessing that there's a gear change there just beyond that point.
There is.
And then
you can see the step in acceleration.
Yeah.
Right.
And then again, heavy deceleration with some trail braking.
Turn 8.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because just to the right of C, where we see that dog leg, where we see a sharp brake for 8, and then a lesser rate of deceleration to account for the rotation that is going on and the trail braking that's going on, it's really important to get this section right.
And the reason we're sharing this with you is there are some great trends here. And I guess we're trying to just, wouldn't it be great if we were looking at all sorts of different, throttle and brake pressure and steering angles, all stuff. But just looking at a speed trace, there's a lot that we can learn, and there's a lot that you can learn. So if you're starting to look at your speed traces, obviously they're going to look different. But if you start looking for some of these same trends and traits, it's going to help you.
Well, the transitions are key, and the cleanliness of the transitions is key. And you can tell the cleanliness of the transitions by and large by the rate at which speed changes over distance. And that's why this is, as you say, something that can be mined for a great deal of value.
Right.
Turn 8, 9, 10. So you see turn 10, another one of these sucker corners. Going to suck you in.
Or character corner.
A character corner, that's right. So it's a very sharp entry. So the turn in is going to be decisive. And then you're going to have a broad open area, and you're going to let the car track out. But the road falls away here, and the most bigger, larger, heavier cars, and even moderate-sized cars, are going to begin to slide from the right to the left, from the apex of turn 10 to the track out and that short straightaway preceding turn 11.
And again, I mean, for whatever reason, this map to me, I look at that and I go, oh, turn 10 is a pretty slow corner. It's a deceivingly quick corner, but as you said, it can sucker you into thinking that it's even too fast,
yeah,
or faster than it really is. But it is a quick corner.
It is a quick corner.
Yeah.
It's really important for a good lap.
Yeah.
So here we are looking from above. You can see it. You can see that the curbing changes direction fairly quickly, right where the access road is. Then you can see how it opens, and the straight line curbing at the top right-hand side of the screen. Very important to track all the way out to that point.
Right. In this corner, and when I look down at this, I go, yeah, see, it's a little quicker than that drawing. I know that the drawing that we're showing is, I mean, that's architectural. I mean, that's real stuff. But there's something about when you actually see it, it never quite. I mean, I love using track maps, and I make a lot of notes on track maps, and I keep track of those things, and I go back and reread those things. But it doesn't show you all the subtle stuff. And I think this starts to show, this Google Earth image shows a little bit more of it.
Well, it's cool because you can see how broad and open that radius of the car,
Yeah.
As evidenced by the yellow line,
Yeah.
is. It's really fun.
Yeah.
So the road falls away after crossing Crown towards the apex from turn into apex at turn 10. If you are off throttle when you reach the turn 10 curbing, it can knock the car around. I would say that that's probably a more aggressive curbing than many of the other curbings that we've seen so far.
So you're saying be on power
That's correct.
at the apex.
I'm saying be on some power.
Right.
You know.
So a little bit of trail brake into here?
Yes, definitely, because you've got to get weight on the nose. If you do the speed moderation before the direction change, then you're going to run into a jam.
Mm-hmm.
If you do the speed moderation before and into the direction change, trail the brake in, leave enough brake to get the weight on the nose, the car's going to change direction quicker, and we're going to get the job done in a more efficient way.
Correct. And so come off the brakes, nice release of the brakes, get the car to change direction into there. And then as we come past that apex curb, getting on power and making sure we're on power as we're going through the apex.
That's right.
Okay.
You can see how much steering input our driver has. And here we have even more steering input. I mean, he's really cranking it now. And the inside front tire of all the cars that are going over the inside, you can tell that the cars are loaded up more laterally when they deposit more rubber on the inside curb. So here we've seen other apex curbs on this lap with this camera car that don't show this amount of rubber transferred from the tires to the curbing. But here, this car is loaded up.
And there's a slight elevation change in here that helps with that, is it?
It's a pocket.
Yeah.
It's a little down towards the apex, up coming off the apex, and boy, it's just like a baseball glove. Feels great.
It kind of loads the car there. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And I think, one other thing that's important to keep in mind is, when we look at the steering angles, there are times where in the middle of a corner, a driver will kind of just put a little more steering in, and, car is not responding. And they put a little steering angle in to find out, well, will it respond?
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes, we may pick up a shot here where we see a little bit of steering angle. It's not necessarily 100% for sure that is the steering angle you're going to use. Because it could be that it's just in the middle of a driver testing the traction limits at that point.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think it's very important that as you come off of turn 10, not to track out before the exit curbing, this long straight section between A and B. You can see where the grass has been worn away. People are early apex in turn 10 quite a bit, and they're putting that left front tire off the road generally before the outside curbing between A and B. So if you are tracking out early from 10, fix the turn-in.
Yeah, the turn-in problem probably happened due to vision. The quick turn into the corner with the vision, turn in early, maybe not, and maybe come off the brakes a little early. So now got a little understeer to make the whole problem even worse. Right. And then you run on a road at the exit here, and obviously we can see, there's been some landscaping done before the exit curbing here. So go fix it back there, probably with your vision and where you're looking towards the end of braking and how you come off the brakes to get the car to rotate. So now you're on the right angle as you pass that apex curbing.
Boy, I'll tell you, 8, 9, and 10, I think, as a complex was the most challenging for me.
Yeah. And for sure, just recently, some of the coaching I've done there is that's the place that people struggle with. It's such there's a rhythm that you need to get there. And I think that's a big part of it. You mess up one part of that section, and it ruins the whole rhythm for the rest of it.
It does. And a lot of people become complacent. A lot of people select a speed and negotiate their entire way through that transition. Yeah. Other people are overly aggressive with big changes in throttle and brake. And I think it's really somewhere in between.
Yeah, So a little bit of patience, but being aggressive and hustling the car as well.
Hustling the car, I love. Aggression, controlled aggression, in the words of my friend Brian Redman, is a wonderful concept, the idea of this controlled aggression.
I always think of controlled aggression as being assertive.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you need to be assertive with the car.
Perfect.
Assertive is aggressive, but in a controlled way. To me, that's
cool.
how I look at it. And yeah, I think that's a great point. Of you see people go through there and they are complacent.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of just driving from one
They're
to the next.
namby-pamby. They're not making a decision.
Yeah,
they're riding along.
And we understand that these virtual track walks are meant for drivers of all levels, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we understand that there are some drivers who realize, again, you're not going to be chugging milk at Victory Circle with the big wreath around you. You may not be in that situation. So we understand that you may not want to drive at 10/10 all the way around this track. But if you choose to drive at 8/10, then drive at 8/10 all the way. And if you're driving at 8/10 in part of the track, but then you get to this section and you drive through there at 6/10, you're not really driving at your limits.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we want to see, and what we're trying to help you do is, if you want to drive at 8/10, fantastic, great, have fun doing that. We're fully in total agreement with that. But just make sure you drive at 8/10 all the time.
Approaching turn 11, your left side of the car is parallel with the left side of the road against that curbing. We're going to wait until the outside edge of the road begins to turn before we turn in. What do you think of that?
That makes sense to me. That, and my experience is, yes, I mean, you've got to be a little patient here on the turn in, right?
I think you do, because as we finish turning right, we're going to enter the apron area, and that is going to cause the car to sort of fall off to the left towards the banking of the oval circuit. And so, especially in a big, heavier car, you're going to want to late apex this. You're going to want to apex around and past the guardrail area and the grass between the track and the Armco. You're going to actually want to apex the area where the grass goes away.
So mentally, you have to be around there.
You do.
You can't physically see it, but mentally you have to see it.
You have to bend the car around, exactly. So here we are, slow hands. Look at minimal steering input, really easy. He's bisecting the middle of the track right now. And it's just a scooch of a steering input. Scooch, how do you like that? Objective measurement, the scooch, right? So we're going to scooch this thing in.
Is it possible to scooch and a half?
Yes, you can scooch and a half.
Or have a half a scooch? Or,
yes, I can. I have a scooch sensor,
Oh, okay. New scooch sensor on your data system.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right. So the goal is apex around the Armco. Mm-hmm. You do not want to be close to the right edge of the track, much, if any, before the worker station, which is where the grass verge on the right ends. Here we can see the point where the grass ends and the concrete begins.
I think the other thing that we see here is the surface.
Yep.
Cars have bottomed there. And, for a number of reasons. There's a little bit of a change in a dip there, but the car is very, very loaded through this section. And it doesn't matter what it is, but obviously a car that's got some aerodynamic downforce here is going to be really heavily loaded here.
That's right. So apex when the grass ends, where the workers are behind the fence. On the right, you can see they're in blue, the workers behind the Armco. We're going to allow the car its head. We're going to let it track out a little bit and get on the oval, but we're basically got a bead on the turn-in point for turn 12. Mm-hmm. We are looking at a painted grandstand on the near side left. We are looking at an unpainted grandstand on the farther side left, which is bisected by the A arrow, and that is the turn-in point. That is the 100 board, and we're going to make a little bit more than a 90-degree right when we get there. So it's going to be another slow corner. It's going to be the same kind of speed that we have seen at turn 1, same kind of speed that we've seen at turn 7, same kind of speed at turn 12.
And I think, there's an awful lot of white lines and pavement changes here, all kind of pointing you in that direction. So no reason to get lost here.
It's like a funnel.
Yeah.
So here we are. We can see the braking zones on the left-hand side, 300, 200, 100. We can see that island curbing again at the letter B. This is exactly the same kind of curbing, exactly the same kind of profile as is used in 1 and 7. It's not quite as long as 1. 1, physically, the curbing is relatively small area. But turn 7 in this area, exactly the same. The turn-in is even with the 100 marker. The backside of the apex B, like turn 1 and turn 7 on the right-hand side.
And Peter, what's your experience? And my experience here is that rarely does a driver ever have their hands perfectly straight when they're braking here. There's just a little bit of angle in the car because you're kind of coming up, leading out to this point here. In the perfect world, we'd have our hands perfectly straight. Mm-hmm. The good news is we've got a little bit of banking to help us here. But I don't know if you've had experience where can you actually get your hands straight here to brake?
I don't think you should. I guess what I'm saying is you could go in on a slight angle that is not parallel to the wall that will take us to the turn-in point, or we can track out a little bit early, make the left side of the car parallel with the left side wall. But I think that you're always going to be arcing to the right-hand side. We see in our camera car, we see a little bit of turn to the right. You are really going fast here.
Yeah.
And I think everyone is very cognizant of the fact that the car wants to drift across the width of the road to the left-hand side as they come on to the short chute.
And a goal would be to try to get the steering wheel as straight as you can during braking, but understand that it's likely in most cars that you won't get perfectly straight there.
And I think that's a great way to explain the fact that there are definitely two ways to skin a cat on this.
Yeah.
There's no reason to pinch the entry, though. You're
Correct.
Absolutely right.
Correct.
So here we are, coming from the top right to the bottom left of the right-hand screen. The reason why your steering can maybe not absolutely straight is illustrated on the right-hand pane of this slide. Your entry is a little more acute than a standard 90 degree.
Mm-hmm.
You have to turn more to the right, which is that late apex, just to the left of 12. And then there's this short straight where you've really got to hustle the car up to 13.
Again, hustle.
Now, I like how you can see that the turn 13, I think, is one of the most difficult corners on the track. The reason why is because it has an indeterminate turn-in point. It is very difficult to fix how deep and the width of where the car should be on the track before you really add steering input.
Again, because there are no cracks in the pavement, there are no curbings that are just definitive there, it makes it harder to see.
That's right.
And pick out your reference point for the turn-in point.
So when you're hustling between 12 and 13, that long entry phase can allow you to accelerate a little bit longer than you might think, brake a little bit later, and then turn the wheel more through that extended middle section because you want to avoid the abrupt tightening after the pit entry begins. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of people get their car slowed, get the wheel turned, are going to apex relatively early and discover after they reach the apex of turn 13 that they are on the wrong trajectory and are going to run out of road at the exit, and that makes them have to get out of the throttle.
Oops.
That's a oops to be avoided, isn't it?
Yes.
So turn 12, the aerial overview, you can actually see the car move. Our camera car, or our data car, didn't go quite as close to the wall as I think we should. He should. She should.
It was a wide car, and the GPS unit
right.
was
it's a semi-tractor trailer.
Yeah.
But the idea is that you really want to turn the wheel, get the car turned. You can see a faint outline of the curbing in this wheel. You can also see the exit curbing from turn 12 on the bottom left-hand side of the screen, and you're going to see how people continue that radius and drive in a straight line on a diagonal over to the turn-in for 13.
This track has that theme, doesn't it?
Yeah,
Where
does.
you come out of one corner and you can kind of just that last little bit, you leave that last little bit of steering in and just hold it there, and that'll track you back over to set up for the next corner.
Pays big dividends for sure. So here we are looking at 12 and 13, and this reinforces what you just said, bringing that car back over to the right. But then there's a pause. There's a pause where the car straightens for a little while, gets slowed down, and then begins the arc to touch the inside curbing at turn 13 late.
And look how late that apex is. This is a wonderful shot to see, to see how late that apex really is.
Well, it shows you how diabolical this corner really is.
Yeah.
Now the path of the car, as evidenced by the yellow GPS trace, is the most popular course configuration. The MotoGP and the bikes use the lower, the portion of the track in the layout that is below that right of center. So that is the motorcycle turn 12,
right.
Where you bend off the wall, drive straight in, brake. I can tell you, the first year that I drove the Indianapolis Motor Speedway 2014, that was our course configuration.
Oh, okay.
And I can tell you right now, that was a lot of work.
But in this case, really, it becomes our escape route.
That's right.
That's
a great point.
You come down and I coached here on an IMSA weekend when there were many drivers that just overshot their braking, got down into the loop there, and came back on the track into 13. Obviously, watching traffic and paying attention to turn workers.
That's a great, a great thing to keep in mind, that exit strategy at all times.
Yeah.
But I love turn 13. I think that it is and was a competitive advantage for me because I had the discipline that you think is so important and keep reinforcing. It served me so well. I mean, it allowed me to set up passes, almost a mile away in turn 1, just from how I turned left.
And then, because of that, you get back to full throttle sooner.
Absolutely. Here we are, entering turn 12. We are, for the most part, straight.
Mm-hmm.
So
tiny little bit of wheel.
Getting back to what you were saying before, the goal is to get the wheel back straight. At the end of the braking zone, maximize that longitudinal deceleration, but leaving enough brake to carry some of the brake past the initiation of the steering input. You can see very clearly the apex island turn arrow B.
And again, on the back side of the curbing.
Here we are on the back side of the curbing now. Lots and lots of steering input. We've got this pushy camera car driving hard, going quickly.
Yeah.
And really getting that right front close to the curbing. You can actually see some rubber on the blue curbing underneath the A mark. Ideally, you should touch it. You should feel it. You should nibble it.
So I was going to ask, my experience is you should be nibbling at that curb. That tire should be there. So what we can assume here is that this driver has missed the apex by a little bit.
That's right.
Probably because he's just trying to get the last ounce out of the car in the brake zone, turn in, might have had that little bit of a push and just ran just a tiny bit wide of the apex.
That's exactly right. And because we're not worried about running out of road at the exit, we can keep that steering input on and connect the A and the B arrows to line up and get ready to drive deep into 13 before we hit the brakes again and turn left.
Right.
So entering turn 13, this is what you really need to look at. There is a light pole just above the A arrow. You really need to draw a bead on that. It's actually to the right of a tire wall that is in existence in this configuration at the time that this photograph and this video was taken. But you're going to drive straight, and you're going to drive fast, and you're going to drive hard up to the A point.
And being right of center. And, to me also, I think the tree.
Yes.
Tree's
good.
While you're not going to aim the car directly towards it, it's such an obvious reference that it's kind of like I just want to be aiming a little to the left of that tree.
Well, it draws your eyes.
Yeah.
Which
helps you.
I think one of the great things in the series of the Speed Secret books has been the training of visual acuity and discipline. Also identifying the relationship between where you look and where your hands and feet execute.
It's amazing what our hands and feet will do if you point your eyes in the right direction.
It is. And I think I discounted in the beginning the importance of vision. And I see now, after working with thousands of people over the course of decades, that it really starts with the eyes, doesn't it?
Starts there, and then I always say it's your eyes that get you around the track, but it's the kinesthetic, your butt and the G-forces and all those things, and your hearing that helps you keep the car at the limit.
Right.
You know, if you didn't have any of that feel, yes, you could get around a track, but you wouldn't be really fast.
You'd be suboptimal.
Yeah.
You'd be
You wouldn't
slow.
be sensing the
Yeah.
limits of the car. So they're all important, but I fully, I mean, if you don't get the eyes right first, hey,
It's hard to get the stuff to fall into place after.
right.
Yeah.
You know, I always joke that, you know, if you were blind, could you drive around a racetrack for a short period of time?
Until you fell off.
Yeah.
That's right. So here we are. Look at how close we are to the right edge of the road. He is really disciplined. Our camera car is very well disciplined on the right-hand side of the road. He doesn't have a great deal of steering input in right now because it's going to be one of these spiral in variable and increasing rate of steering.
So progressively quicker.
That is correct. So it's got to be tied. That progressively quicker steering input has to be tied to the velocity of the car. So in proportion and in relation to the slowing of the car, does the wheel need to speed up in adding more steering input? I think that's the hardest thing to teach. That is exactly why the kinesthetics and developing kinesthetic senses and sensibilities pay so much attention, because it's a balancing act.
And I think, you know, we've had this conversation recently about most drivers, again, they turn the steering wheel the same way every single corner. And every single corner requires a different rate of turning the wheel. And, you know, as I look at this image, I kind of go, if I was watching this, I'd be going, why does the driver not turn in from the edge of the road? Didn't they just say that we should be using all the track on the entry of the corner?
The entry phase is too long.
I think it is too long. And I think in this particular corner, if you get the car all the way out to that outside edge, you'll never get it all the way back there without just putting so much steering angle in. So again, it's one of those, you got to compromise, sacrifice a little bit.
We had talked also about the way we learn new tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And I must say that when I started, when I was trying to learn this track, and when I've seen other people try to learn this track, they start with the basics, which is to utilize the full width of the road unless there's a compelling reason not to.
A great point.
Then we discover that there is not a compelling reason to use the full width of the road at the entry. What is important, and perhaps more important, is how deep you go before you begin to turn.
Correct. And again, then it comes down to that rate of steering angle. It's what makes this so much fun and so challenging. If
Makes us come back.
If every corner was turned, you use the same steering rate,
Right.
this would get boring.
Well, I think that's how we learn. I mean, we have to grasp simple concepts before we can grasp advanced ones and abstract ones. So it was very simple and very easy for people to practice the idea of a fixed arc, drawing a fixed arc through a particular corner, through an off-ramp, driving and practicing on the road.
And I always say that, you know, the really secret, advanced stuff that the best drivers in the world use is just doing the basics better.
That's right.
And the basics are turning the wheel at the right rate. But as you become better, you start to realize that this corner requires a quicker rate of steering. This one requires a little slower. This one's progressively faster. This one is digressively slower.
Right.
So it's all different rates of steering as well.
Yeah. So 10 would be digressive to me.
Correct.
Okay. 13 would be the
Progress.
opposite.
Yeah.
Exactly. Progressive.
Yeah.
Exactly. So see, this is fun because 90% of the battle is coming up with a glossary that we can use to communicate these things. And a glossary that you develop in your own head and your own mind when you're reviewing and studying these virtual track walks, and also conducting and participating in real-life track walks.
And I would say that this track, more than many, because of the way that corners are linked together, you have to experiment with different rates of steering input.
Agreed.
And, you know, there's a lot of tracks where the steering rate is pretty similar, most corners. But this one, it's very different, and because of the way the corners are linked together.
So here we have a few more visual cues. It's actually a little more clear now than it was in 2014 when this video was taken. The pit lane entry is where B is, which is in line with the scoring pylon in front of the pagoda in the distance. And what you're going to really want to do is cross the width of the road to reach the inside at the appropriate place, which is A in this particular slide.
Again, look how far around the curbing it is.
Crazy far around. And look at how much steering lock he's got.
Yeah.
So this is an issue where we really want to get to the inside, but we don't want to do it too soon. Now we're talking. 90 degrees of steering input on a car like this is a lot of steering.
That's a lot of steering.
Big steering.
And I'm going to say, this image makes it look like we're falling downhill a lot.
And we are.
How much?
There is
Is this the total 14 feet of elevation change?
This is one place where it's very clear that there is a preponderance of it.
Yeah.
This is one of those things where we've actually gone up a little bit from the exit of 12 to the entry of 13, and as we approach the apex and from the apex to track out, the road falls away to match back up with the apron on the inside of turn 1.
Hey, it's practically like the corkscrew at Laguna. Only about less than a tenth of that. Yeah.
That's amazing to me. But it also goes to show that even in a track that appears to be flat, appearances can be deceiving.
And it contributes to the late apex here.
That's correct.
If the track was going uphill at this point, you would probably apex a little earlier because you would be gaining grip. Mm-hmm. But in this case, we're fighting against that.
And we're going to lose it.
Yeah.
We're going to lose it even more as we leave the apex. You can see that there's almost no transfer between the tire and the curbing in this particular picture, just principally because the car's not going that fast. The car is still turning instead of being loaded up.
Right.
And so at this particular point, the frustration zone begins at A and ends at B. So if I was really consistent, there'd be a yellow on this slide that would show that.
Right. And I'd say the other, because this corner is slower, there's less aerodynamic downforce, correct, which is putting, it's relying on those outside tires. You don't have any aero pushing that inside tire down on that curbing.
Good point. So here we are, track out at 13.
I love this. He's using all the track.
This is really nice. I mean, not only is he using all the track, but his right side of the car is parallel with the right side of the road at the exit. If you have a situation where you approach the exit curbing from turn 13 on the Indianapolis GP road course circuit at any sort of angle, instead of approaching it parallel, work backwards. Fix it.
Good point.
If you have a situation where you must extend steering lock past the apex for any significant amount of time, instead of allowing the car to open and approach the exit curbing more parallel, fix it, because this is so important. This corner is so important.
And when you say fix it, that means next lap thinking about where you're turning in for the corner and how you're releasing the brakes. And again, you got to have your vision in the right place, scanning, moving, but looking in the right places.
That's right. Now, we're actually going to open the entry for turn 14, which is the right leading onto the pit straight. We're going to open that by putting a little bit of distance between the right side of the car and the inside of the curb. When people try to stay against the inside curb for too long, the road, as it drops away, as it approaches the apron, especially in a big, heavier car that is trying to apply throttle, will really upset the car. I would have to say that a lot of the video and the data that I've reviewed on larger, high horsepower cars, especially big, heavy GT cars, really shows that you've got to be gingerly with the throttle as you rejoin the front straight and cross this apron.
And that's where, our experiences have been, I can't count the number of cars, drivers, data traces, videos that we've looked at for these tracks. I mean, the hundreds. And, we look at certain things, some cars, it's kind of relatively easy flat through there. Other cars, it's hang on for dear life through there. Right. So that's part of what makes this fun again, is everything's different.
So looking at the data trace, this is from the left to the right. We're coming out of turn 11. We are accelerating hard to get to the brake zone for 12, listed by the arrow A. We're going to brake hard. We're going to trail it in just a little bit. Roll speed, trailing the brake into the apex at B. We're going to blast it. We're going to accelerate as hard as we can, hustle between the exit of turn 12 and the braking zone for turn 13. Now, in this particular case, turn 13 is slower than turn 12. Now, think about that.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of people, they're used to going fast. They don't want to go slow. So what in this particular case is they think that they can attack 13 like they can 12, and it doesn't work.
And they get frustrated.
And they keep banging their head against the wall, and they say, why is this such a pain in the ass?
It's a big, long... It's a tight corner that's long with a very, very late apex that you have to be patient on the entry, correct?
Bingo.
Yeah.
And it is a decreasing radius corner. Classic.
Yeah.
And it is one of the few on this circuit.
Yeah.
But it is designed specifically to catch you out. So accelerate hard out of 12, hard initial brake for 13.
And I love the trail into 13 to keep weight on the front end of the car and spiral into the apex. I like that.
Well, it's fun. We constantly attach importance to new words. I mean, we all adopt different words and use them more frequently when we find value in them. And I've found a great deal of value in describing this whole procedure of rolling speed into the corner, reducing speed at the same rate that I'm increasing the steering input amplitude and rate as a spiral. I'm just spiraling down. It's neat.
As long as you don't continue to spiral down.
That's right.
Because once you get to towards that apex, you got to be starting to unwind and come the other direction.
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
So the Vmin dwell angle is very short duration. I think, when I am looking at a simple speed versus distance graph, just a quick review, and this is an optical review. You don't need to look at any values. You don't need to pan. You don't need to look at any video. If your dwell angle, or the period of time that you're at the lowest speed for any particular corner, is very short in distance, it's going to be short in time, generally. And in this particular case, this is a very effective, very efficient finish of brake, application of throttle.
And I think what it shows is there's a pattern. If you look at this trace, you look at the trace from the previous section, and you look at the trace from the first section, there's a pattern there.
There is a pattern.
Yeah.
There sure is. Now, I will say that between 1 and 2, the speed that you can, go through turn 2, a lot quicker than you can go through turn 1, but there's still a step.
Yeah.
In particular, 7, 8, 9, you're actually accelerating. You can go faster through 8 than you can go through 7, and you go faster through 9 than you can go through 8.
Right.
But you can't quite go flat through 10.
Right.
There's still a little step. Here, it's a little bit different in the fact that you have a faster corner before the slower corner.
Right.
And that can, again, cause this to be frustrating because you're saying, well, why can't I do turn 13 at the same speed that you can turn 12? And that's just simply not possible with the radius of the turn and the layout.
So if any of you have ever autocrossed, it's almost like that the distance between cones is decreasing.
Exactly.
And you're coming in there fast, and it's like tightening up as you're coming through there, and that's what's happening in this section.
That's right. And you don't want to react. You want to plan.
Yeah.
So here we are looking at the geometric center line, the CAD drawings. You can see the pit entry to the left. Direction of travel is from the top to the bottom. The turn 13 track out to the edge of the track curb is notated by the orange arrow. And then there's nothing for the beginning of the sweep to the right. And what we really want to do is allow there to be a little bit of distance, bring the car out 1 or 2 car widths from the inside edge. You don't need to go open the entry so much that you're left of center. Otherwise, you may not get back to the inside like you've pointed out before. But there's substantial off camber and declination exiting the road course onto the oval track. Big cars can become very loose when coupled with the progression to wide open throttle and the car sort of falling over and falling down.
Right.
So in the car, it looks like this. Our drivers come off the inside edge of the road after tracking out from 13. They are turn 14 apex area. It's not just a point, it's an area, is A, because we want the latest, greatest shot onto the pit straight. We want to reduce the amount of lateral load that is on the car when the road completes its fall away in the apron. So the apex A, the exit is B. We want to look far, far down the road. This is past that gray safer barrier, just underneath the B. That if you can see it in this picture, it's way off in the distance. But you want to put that right front tire almost against that white line. Our camera car, not much steering input, trying to go as quickly as they can, try to go as straight as they can.
Yep, minimum steering input through here. And yes, you don't need to be on the curb.
So here we are coming off. Now, it wasn't his entire choice that he ends up closer to the left verge line than the right verge line. I mean, he's really accelerating here. The car is actually walking out to the left-hand side. You really want to make the left side of the car parallel with the verge line on the left side where those two white lines meet, just left of center on the upper side of this slide. B is the start-finish stand. So again, just the sheer scale of this place is exceptional.
And I think at this point, you're just, in your mind, you're thinking the finish line.
I want to go there.
Yes.
I want to do that.
Yep.
So here we are, the pit straight. Beautiful.
Unwound the wheel, just releasing the car, let her run free.
Yep. Read the sports pages till turn 1.
Yeah, and what a view down here. It's like a tunnel, and yet it's a wide tunnel.
It is a wide tunnel.
Yeah. Speaking of tunnels,
that's the most famous tunnel in motorsports, or one of them.
Yeah,
for sure. This in Monaco.
Yeah, I mean, it really is a magical place, and again, as we said in the beginning, don't be overly awestruck by it. Respect it, enjoy it, appreciate it for the history that's in this place, and just totally enjoy the fact that you're getting to drive at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. What an incredible experience.
We hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks, and have fun.